Hello and welcome to episode 60 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we're going to go through the first week of matches in the Call of Duty League's 2023 season, which included a very controversial forfeit result involving OpTic Texas. But we'll talk about all the matches, and at the end of the show, we'll be predicting the next set of matches, which will be the final set before we get to the very first major of the new CDL season. But before we do any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm all right. Been a long week, but we got some COD to talk about, and even more coming tomorrow. So it should be a good one.
Yep. Let's just get right into it then. We're going to start off with, we're going to go in chronological order. If you haven't been a part of our podcast over the past two seasons, typically what we do during the season is, we kind of give our thoughts on the matches, the qualifying matches as it happens through the week. And then we'll give our predictions later in the show. We'll start with Boston versus Atlanta, the first match of the new CDL season. We both picked Atlanta for this, and it didn't quite work out in our favor. Boston looked pretty good, and Atlanta, maybe as some people expected, did not look as good as they have in past seasons. This is the first year in a few years that they made a roster change in the offseason. Any thoughts on Boston winning this 3-1?
Yeah, I think the big thing that stands out is this was Big Wake's debut on Boston, and he played like Big Wake in this one. I had a 1.31 overall KD, and I think one of the highlights of the entire series was his 1v2 on Albagra Search and Destroy. I forget who the two players were. I can click the clip and actually find it. But he didn't even have dead silence popped, and he was able to make a play through the bottom middle part of the map, out the doors, and just flanked both Abizi and Cillian from behind. So that was in the fifth round of the search. That was tied 2-2, so it was a pretty big momentum swing that Boston was able to capitalize on after losing the first match of the series, which was Embassy Hardpoint. So pretty big swing there, and then they go on to take the Control 3-0, which was pretty impressive too. I believe they won two offenses in the Control, and although this was the first series of the season, I think I'm pretty sure JCap tweeted that's the first time he had seen anybody win two offenses in an Albagra Control since scrims and everything like that. And I think it's something like that was the first time, and it might even be the last. So. Limited sample size, obviously, for us fans, but that is something to keep an eye on going forward that we might not see again. So that was interesting, and yeah, just overall, it was obviously surprising that Boston won to us and probably a number of viewers and fans just because of the pedigree and the expectations placed upon a team like Atlanta FaZe. So good win, strong upset to start the season here. And yeah, it was, at least for me, I wasn't expecting it. So started things off on an interesting note.
Yeah, I think Boston fans are probably hoping that it's a sign of things to come, that this team will gel quickly and be able to get out to a really good start. For FaZe, it's hard to judge any team, not just FaZe, but any of these teams on two matches of online matches as well. That's kind of a small sample size, like you said, and we don't really know how different the game will play online versus LAN, which that's a big chunk of those points will come when they get to the first major. But I mean, Boston looked really good. FaZe, I don't think that there was anything that popped out to me that was super different from last season when they were winning matches. It just, I mean, they didn't get the kills they needed, and sometimes that's just the way it works. And if you look at the stats, Abizi and Sim didn't have great games outside of map one, but again, when you lose a match, that's kind of to be expected as well. So I don't really know where to actually react to that, especially considering we'll talk about their later result. That is an impressive victory, you would think, and maybe things just turned around later in the weekend. The second match of the week and of the season is obviously the most controversial of any of the matches that we had this weekend. OpTic Texas went up against the Minnesota Rocker, and I mean, this is a weird situation that really kind of illustrates some of the issues that the Call of Duty League has, or Call of Duty Esports has, with not having the technology to go into certain sections of the map, like pause a map and then be able to rewind it so players can get the streaks back that they had, or be able to resume when a bug comes into play. And this was the case with, I believe, Cammy got stuck into one of his streaks that was GA'd, and he froze for several seconds, and they Minnesota basically complained about it. They said, like, we couldn't really do anything with him on the map because of this bug. They wanted to replay the map despite losing it, and OpTic said no, and it ended up being a forfeit loss for OpTic. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of those details, but essentially OpTic went from possibly winning this series because they were in the driver's seat to outright losing it and starting their season off with a loss. Your thoughts on this OpTic Minnesota controversy?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this. Before we get into the actual forfeit situation and stuff, there were 2 maps that were played.
Mm-hmm.
Technically 3 maps were played in full because the control was completed. The bug happened at the very end of map 3. So regardless of the ruling, the map was actually finished. But in map 1, it was a close one. I think, yeah, 250 to 203 on Hydro Hardpoint. And the thing that I took away from that is that, it was the first match of the season for OpTic, obviously, but it's also the last first match of Scump's season and career. So just looking at that from, everything, as we said before, everything Scump does this year is going to be even under a microscope more than in the past, just because it's potentially his last dance. So he played really well in game 1, though. In particular, he led the entire lobby with 27 kills, went 27 and 17. Afro and Dance both had 23. That was second most, and Shotzi had the third most in the game with 21, but Scump had by far the best individual statistical performance to start this series, so that was definitely worth noting. Then we go to the Search and Destroy, and it was just an absolute dominant performance from Minnesota 6-0. I honestly, I was going to watch it back, but I didn't, and I don't even remember really watching much of it just because it was so fast, and just Minnesota was in control, and that could be a theme for this team throughout the year. If they're able to continue to play well and Search and Destroy, they're going to be a very scary team throughout the rest of the year. And then in the control itself, Scump once again played particularly well, went 28 and 20, had a huge 2-piece at the end of the game that essentially opened things up for OpTic to try to close things out in the 5th round of the control. But now getting to the actual situation around the forfeit and all that, there's a lot of viewpoints you can tackle this from. It's seemingly just, I would have to go back and actually watch the specific end of the game, but it seemed like even with the kill streak, it would have been hard for Minnesota to actually stop OpTic there unless literally the streak wiped out everybody on the team just because of the map position that OpTic had and everything like that. But regardless of where you stand on whether it should have been replayed and all that stuff, I think one thing that needs to be noted and one thing that was talked about heavily was the fact that the streak was GA'd, and I don't think that's something that needs to be considered in this situation, just because a bug can happen with any feature in the game, right? It doesn't matter. It could have been the M4, which was by far the most popular gun used throughout this weekend, and somebody could have got a bug where they couldn't reload it or something like that, right? It could have even been one of the streaks that is allowed, like the Predator missile. So regardless of the fact that it was a GH streak, I don't think that matters. I think the bigger issue is that this bug exists, is known about, and the pros and people's hands are tied because we're in a position where there's just not consistent patches with bugs like this. It could be a very long time where something like this is before something like this is fixed. And I think that's the bigger issue. It's really um, out of the player's hands. And in this game in particular, with the CDL mode, you're not able to unselect the SAE. So I think I can't remember. I think it's might actually be called a precision airstrike, whatever. Um, the third option is actually called, but you can pick precision airstrike and the cruise missile or predator missile, whatever you want to call it. That's the 6 streak, and then the 7 streak is the SAE. You have to have 2 of those selected. Um, just by default, like you can't only select one. And I feel like that would be an easier fix than even fixing the actual streak itself. Like if you just had the option to deselect the SAE, they wouldn't have it, have that happen. The other issue that I have noticed from playing the game myself too is that selecting the kill streaks when you have multiple of them is different than in other games, and I feel like it's almost in reverse. Whereas in previous games, if you had multiple streaks and you hit the kill streak button just fast, it would automatically use the first streak. In this game, it uses the last one. So if Cammy wasn't thinking about it and just went to use a streak right away, trying to get to that missile or airstrike, but has the SCE is the higher streak, and it just went to that by default, causes the bug, etc. Um, so there's just a lot of things with this game in general that need to be fixed, and obviously a bug with a kill streak might not be the top priority, but this just is an example in the long run of, fixes or something needs to be done to address this going forward, because it could happen in a crucial $1,000 round of search and destroy even, or, obviously this is an important qualifying match, but it wasn't the grand finals of COD Champs. And who knows, we could realistically be looking at a bug that exists until COD Champs if the developers don't get on it fast. So I think that's the bigger takeaway, at least in my eyes. It obviously, because it happened against OpTic, the most popular team in the league, it was magnified even more. I think this is definitely an issue regardless of what team it happened to. But I think for those who care about the competitive integrity of the league, it's almost a good thing that it happened to OpTic just due to their popularity and the kind of influence and so much vocal support for a team like OpTic, and frustration voiced about the circumstances could actually be more likely to cause change, as opposed to if this happened to Vegas or London. I don't know. I guess London isn't a great example just because they have the EU support, but hopefully viewers understand what I'm trying to say.
I think that's a good point about it happening to OpTic, so there's more eyeballs on it, and the pressure from the community could be even greater on Activision, just because OpTic got screwed by it, or were definitely did not benefit from this. That being said, I also think it's a good precedent to follow for the CDL, because there's always the possibilities and there's the likelihood that you will have bugs in Call of Duty, especially when it's online. And if it's not a user error, if it's your controller died, your controller broke mid map, that's like if your pads break or something, or your shoe disintegrates like Zion's did when he was at Duke. Like something like that it's your equipment and it's therefore your responsibility. Whereas this is an Activision, this is an Infinity Ward thing. This is not a like a Minnesota Rocker. They caused this. He accidentally pressed a button and he's frozen in the map. Like that is entirely on the developer and the publisher, and therefore the CDO. And if that's the case, then that they kind of have to replay it, even if you would logically think they probably weren't going to win, or like the likelihood that they would win is small. At the end of the day, if the team wants to replay it, they should have the opportunity to replay it. And OpTic could have replayed it if they wanted to. They did not. They did not want to replay the map, and therefore they had to forfeit. Like I think it's an unfortunate situation, but it's also just something that happens. And I don't really know if there's anything that the CDL could do about it. And I've said that before in the past where, the CDL gets screwed a lot of times because they're also dealing with a, a bug-ridden game that they didn't personally develop. Like the people running the CDL, the people that are making decisions about the league's choices, they don't have a real say in how this game runs or if it runs smoothly. They hope it does, but they don't really have a lot of sway or influence in that. And they did what I think is the correct decision. And it's just unfortunate that OpTic got their season off to such a bad start because of everything that happened in this one control map.
I will say too that a couple of other important things to consider is that regardless of whether you agree with the decision to replay the entire map or if there was the technology available to just replay that round, or even like in League of Legends with the chrono break, they could have went to like 5 seconds before Cammy hit the kill streak. If that technology was available, we're having a totally different conversation here. I think somebody, it might have been on Breaking Point or Tactical Rab, I don't know where I saw it, but I think somebody dug up a tweet from Daniel, the GM for CDL earlier, talking about a replay feature being in the plans for this season and whatnot. So obviously that wasn't available for this match, but if we get something that consistently works like that, that helps avoid these situations entirely, or at least helps mitigate them much better than this instance where we had almost an hour delay where we were just sitting here waiting to determine what was going to happen between map 3 and the eventual ruling. So the other thing that although regardless of whether you think it was a correct decision to have a replay of the entire map or whatever, one thing to note too is that there were plenty of memes about this after the fact in the following matches where it was like, oh, if you're losing, just hit your SAE and then the CDL will give you a replay. That's a bigger issue entirely if situations like that occur further down the line. The one thing that I think people didn't realize when they're saying that is it's not like every single player has an SAE, because you have to go on a 7-kill streak to get it. So it's not like everybody just has an SAE in their back pocket. Like you have to actually go on a streak to earn it in the first place. But regardless of that, I think it was even, it was brought up that even before the match, Cammy himself tweeted on November 27th, "Can we get rid of streaks until they get fixed? My whole team got cruises and people are just putting precisions on us getting 3 pieces to break, unless there is actually a way to change them." And that goes back to what I was saying with the issues with selecting streaks and whatnot. But regardless, like it's been known by the players that there are issues with streaks, and as long as this isn't a case where I know there are certain people, including OpTic fans, who accused Cammy of purposely using the SAE to cause the bug. Like, obviously, I think that's ridiculous. Like, he can't cause a bug to happen even if he knows about the potential bug. Like, it's not guaranteed to happen every single time. But it is an issue if we see going forward somebody has an SAE, is losing, and calls it in, and then we get a replay again. That's something I definitely don't want to see going forward. So this situation, no matter what side of the fence you sit on with it, the precedent has been set now for the rest of the year until this bug potentially gets fixed. It's going to be on the CDL to make sure that this is a consistent ruling going forward until we're able to get to a point where the streak is fixed, the bug is remedied, and we don't have to worry about it anymore.
Yeah, the CDO is also, like you mentioned, they're going to have to kind of watch these players and see if anybody is manipulating the rules to benefit themselves. And it's going to be hard to determine which players are purposefully doing it. If they do, press their SAE and they, freeze and they're like, all right, let's get our replay. I don't know how the CDL is going to react to that, but it's something that they have to be really careful about, because then it just becomes a really easily abused mechanic in the game. But again, the CDL is kind of picking up the slack that the developers have essentially let go, because that's something the developers should have to worry about and about fixing it. Whereas the CDL shouldn't be worried about people pressing a score streak and getting an automatic replay. But that is the Call of Duty League, and that's just kind of how things go. But yeah, so Minnesota, they technically won that series 3-1, or I don't even know if they're considering there is a 3-1.
Yeah, if you go to the CDL site, it says that OpTic lost map 4 250-0, which is pretty funny in my opinion. But obviously, for the sake of our viewers here, those are the technical scores. It would be Minnesota winning map 3 3-2. Actually, I don't even know if that's technically correct. It would let's see what the CDL put up for that. I was gonna say yeah, because they ruled for a full map replay. I do the schedule.
Yeah, so it'd probably be a 3-0 and a 250-0 in map 4.
Much details.
But that's
I'm looking.
The stats.
No, they have it 3-2 for control too, which is interesting. Oh, and now it says 1-0 for hardpoint on El Bagra. That's even funnier.
Yeah.
But regardless, for our viewers' sake, the map 4 was not played in this series. Map 3 was not replayed after OpTic won 3-2. So the technical situation is OpTic won map 1, Minnesota won map 2, then OpTic was offered the replay for map 3, refused to do the replay, so they lose map 3, and refused to continue the series, so they forfeit map 4. It's a 3-1 for Minnesota.
Mm-hmm. Yep. OpTic, they got another chance to win later in the weekend, and they didn't finish out the weekend on a bad note, but they definitely started off pretty bad. The next match that we have is the Los Angeles Thieves and the Las Vegas Legion. So the first, I believe they're actually just called the Vegas Legion. So this is the first match for the Legion since they relocated from Paris to Vegas. And they kind of did what the Legion do, and they lost, but I didn't think it was too bad of a result, especially in Search and Destroy. They won 6-2 on Al Bagra, and they were pretty competitive in both of the hard points as well, and they are facing the defending world champions, so it's not a unexpected result that the Legion lost, and I think they put up a good fight. What do you think?
Yeah, that was exactly my takeaway from this. It was a match I expected LAT to win. I probably expected them to win, a little more convincingly even than they did. But at the end of the day, I was pretty impressed with how Vegas played. It's obviously a tough first match for essentially the last place team playing the first place team from the previous season. But I thought, they kept it close, and they played pretty well, especially in the hard points. They, put up 204 and 198 in losing efforts. So, just around losing by only 50 points. Pretty close. The control was pretty dominant for LAT, 3-0 on Hotel, but like you said, 6-2 in the search for Vegas. So yeah, I don't have much else to say on that. I think this was a match most people expected LAT to win, but Vegas did look better than some people might have expected.
Last match on Friday was the Los Angeles Guerrillas versus the Seattle Surge. So RCD's LAG debut, and Seattle, after having an incredible season last year, they're bringing back their roster. A really close series in at least some parts. The opening hard point, both hard points actually were not very close at all, but we had a game 2 round 11 search, and then we had a really close control as well in game 3. But LAG were able to pull off the upset. It's pretty obvious that this would have been an upset, especially if you looked at the stats and you saw that Sib He was 108 and 57 for a 1.89 KD. He had he actually had exactly double Sparks kills in this series, but it didn't matter because LAG were able to pull out the victory. They won Greenberg Hotel Game 5 search 6-2. Let me get your thoughts on this because I was not very high on the Gorillas heading into this season. I wasn't entirely sure what to expect of the Surge because they had a good season last year, but I was probably not going to put them in the top 3 again. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think this one there was another lengthy delay before Game 5, and this
Mhm.
one I wasn't listening to the stream at that point, so I don't even know exactly what the issue was. Um, but it is worth mentioning there was another long delay in this match, and it took forever for the series to actually end. But regardless, it was a pretty good series. Like you said, the highlight is Sib just absolutely going off with 108 kills. Like you said, double what Spark produced, but to put it in even more perspective, the next highest in the entire series was Pred with 81, and the highest on LAG was 75 with Hook. So he had over 30 more kills than the highest kill total on the other team. So it was just a really strong performance out of Sib, regardless of the loss. Um, LAG also had all 4 players go negative in the victory, which you don't see very often. That can be explained a little better though by the fact that they won maps 2, 3, 5. So obviously, when you win 2 searches, KD doesn't matter as much, and you're more likely to see negative KDs overall if you're winning searches as opposed to winning hardpoint just because of the respawn nature. So I thought that was interesting, and it was also interesting. Seb dropped 16 kills in the map 2 search and destroy, which obviously that's going to help the kill total even a little bit more than dropping like 30 plus kills in a respawn. So definitely an interesting series. We both picked Seattle, which a trend for this week was us getting picks wrong. But regardless of that, yeah, I didn't have much expectations on LAG. I expected this to be a close series, but I did think Seattle was going to take it, and um, I'm happy that Arcides was able to get a win on his first team or in his first match for a new team. And I think, yeah, this is just, it's going to be a situation again similar to last year where we might see some consistency issues with Seattle. Um, Obviously, hard to tell from one match, but it could be another situation where we see LAG, is able to pull off more wins and throw some predictions out the window. But end of the day, it is just, it was one match on the first weekend, so I still need to see a lot more from both teams.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem with predictions earlier in the year where you have these online matches with somewhat new rosters or a completely different game. The meta, we'll maybe talk about it later in the episode, but the meta could be changing as well. So many changes happen in the first month of the season, and because there are only 2 weeks of online qualifying matches, we have even less of a actual sample size to judge these players and these teams on heading into the first major. So our predictions are probably going to suck for at least like the first month. Maybe we'll get it right by major 2, but we were wrong pretty much on London for a while last season. I was wrong, I think, on LAG or something as well, multiple times. Florida definitely screwed me quite a bit as well, but we'll hopefully get better in our predictions, or maybe just me, which would be nice. Starting on Saturday, we had Minnesota versus Toronto. This was, I think, one of the matches that we were most looking forward to heading into this weekend because obviously Standy moved from Minnesota to Toronto in the offseason, and then Scrappy was making his CDL debut. And Minnesota, they overhauled their roster with a European flavor coming in with this half Toronto and then Afro coming from London. So I was really excited to watch this, and I was really, really impressed by both teams in a sense, but especially Minnesota. They come out with a 3-1 win. What are your thoughts? Because you are obviously really looking forward to Scrappy's debut. So how did he do?
Yeah, I mean, he definitely played well in map 1. In particular, he led the entire lobby with 31 kills. Um, the next closest was Kleenex with 23. Everybody else in the lobby, all the other 6 players, all had less than 20 kills. So, um, pretty solid performance there from Scrappy. But then after that, it was all Minnesota throughout the rest of the season, or sorry, the rest of the series.
Oh, spoiler
Um,
alert.
I think this was an important win after the circumstance with the OpTic match, though. Like, if Minnesota lost the series after getting that forfeit win over OpTic, there would have been, um, even more hate potentially, like thrown at them, like, oh, they should be 0-2, yada yada. But them getting this win, I think, proves to anybody doubting Minnesota's potential is that they certainly have the potential to be a top team this year. And yeah, I think that's the biggest takeaway from this is that they, it certainly doesn't silence any haters, especially when something happens for your team against a fan base like the Green Wall. I think it does prove a point to the extent that just Minnesota is going to be a team that is competing late in tournaments throughout this year. It wouldn't surprise me to see that. Again, limited sample size. We technically didn't even get to see 2 full matches out of them because of the forfeit. But they did, take down another team that would be in that similar like middle of the pack ranking tier heading into the series in most people's eyes. So, um, it was a pretty good win. I was thinking Toronto was going to take it, but um, obviously in the end Minnesota gets that win. They go to 2-0, which with the forfeit um, is important for their seeding heading into the major. But obviously this major is a little different with the pro am and group play and all that stuff. Regardless, you obviously want to be 2-0 as opposed to 1-1 or 0-2.
Yeah, definitely. Um, really, Minnesota, they were very impressive, and I'm very much looking forward to these teams playing again, maybe on LAN or just later down the season, because these teams with the chemistry and the experience with each other, I think can be really entertaining. I believe I put these two teams both in the top 5, maybe even the top 4 in my power rankings when we did them, like a week ago, and I still think that both of these teams are some of the very best that the CDL has to offer. Next up, we had New York versus London. Of course, we got this wrong. This was a London match, so it's kind of par for the course for us. We both picked New York, and London, they swept the subliners. I I don't know, like I don't want to sell London short, but it also seemed like New York tilted when they lost the opening hard point because they kind of well, not kind of, but they really screwed up. They lost 250 to 244 on Albagra, and it looked like they had it in the bag at one point, and it slipped away, and then London just ran through New York in games 2 and 3. What do you think of this series?
I think that's a fair assessment. I think obviously we don't know exactly what's going on in the camp, um, but obviously in the nature that they lost that last match with a late comeback and to lose by 6 points in the game 1, I think it's very safe to say that it's possible that they could have tilted. Um, and that's a huge momentum swing. Obviously, you go into a round base mode like Search, um, which we can talk about it after we talk about London's next match too. But London just played really well in Search all weekend long, and that could be a recipe for success for them if they're able to keep it up. But regardless of that, is just I was very surprised. Not only that London won, but that they were able to win in 3-0 fashion. Again, could have been a different story if New York were able to close out map 1. Who knows what happens, but we can't play the games of what ifs and all that. We just got to deal with what actually ends up happening. So certainly interesting. New York is one of those teams where they have talent. It's really just going to be a question of whether they're able to put it together and how this group of 4 meshes. So I'm looking forward to seeing more from New York going forward, but obviously this was a surprising one to me.
Yeah, definitely. Then we had Seattle versus Boston. Again, got this wrong. We both picked Seattle, and the breach came away with the victory 3-1. Let's just talk about Seattle real quick before we, kind of give Boston their props because, they had a really incredible weekend to start, beating Atlanta and Seattle, two of the top three teams from last season. But let's just talk about the Surge real quick. They start the season 0-2, a pretty close loss to LAG. They were a round away, essentially, from winning that series in game 2, and then they lost here to Boston. Is it too early to be concerned about the Surge, or for the Surge fans that are having flashbacks to 2020 and 2021, or even half of 2022 where they lost like 7 matches in a row? Is it too early for them to be concerned about their Seattle Surge?
I think it's too early. The team just has too much potential, and obviously we saw with them winning a major trophy last year and getting third at Champs at the end of the year. This team has a ton of potential, so I don't think we need to be panicking right now just after 2 early matches if you're a Seattle fan. But I do think the 2 wins for Boston against teams like FaZe and Seattle, which obviously Seattle stuck. FaZe only changes Arcides for Slasher, which could be a very big change in the grand scheme of things. But on paper, it's only a 1-person change, so they're effectively playing almost the same 8 players from last year on the teams that got second and third at the biggest tournament of the year. And Boston, in its second year as a franchise, they only they bring in Big Wake, who obviously played very well this weekend, but they only made a 1-person change, and it seems like that 1-person change is already paying dividends for them early on. Still, again, I got to see more from all these teams, but I think this is a very strong start for Boston. You really can't. I don't think it is a very strong start for Boston. But I want to see more, and I want to see if this is consistently what we can expect from the squad.
Yeah, it's gonna be, like Seattle, they had a very up and down season last year, so maybe they're starting on the downslope right now, but they'll come up in a few weeks or something like that. It happens with them. They kept doing it all throughout last season, and they finished on a really high note. The
I'm
last
pretty
match,
sure I said when we were doing our predictions that we picked Seattle to go 2-0 and they were going to go 2.
yeah, it's kind of the deal. Seattle and London just, they don't really care about our pick'ems. The last match of Saturday, Florida versus Vegas. I mean, it's I feel like I'm being overly optimistic about the Legion right now. I'm not saying that they're winning champs. They are, but I'm not saying that. Vegas, they're really, really close to winning this one. They pulled out 2 relatively close hard points. The second hard point was a 13-point victory. I don't really remember the control, but the search, they completely blew it. They were up 4-1, I believe, in game 5, and then Florida rattles off 4 straight rounds to make it 5-4. Vegas was able to force a round 11, but then they lost the round 11. I'm not obviously losing is bad. Like let's be obvious, but this is if there's a moral victory for Vegas, it's that usually they would have probably broken down in like game 4 in this last year. Like they wouldn't have been able to get to game 5. What do you think about this loss for Vegas?
Yeah, I think we both had very low expectations for Florida and Vegas overall heading into the season.
2 of the worst teams, I thought.
Especially considering Vegas's performance against LA Thieves in their first match, I feel like this was a match that, some people, regardless of that first match, might have thought Vegas should win. And then you see how they stacked up against LAT in their loss, and you might even be thinking like, yeah, they should definitely win this one, but it just wasn't in the cards for them this time. I think that's the bigger red flag for me here is that If Vegas wasn't able to win this one, like what's next? Are we in for another historically bad season for Vegas? For the players' sake on that team, I hope not. But I feel like this was a match they should have won, and very easily could have won. Especially some other things went their way, but um, I think for Florida, obviously I said it on the other show. I'm pretty excited about seeing Brack actually getting to play in the league. He played well in this series. Didn't have the most kills on his team, but he had a positive KD, so he was doing his job. I think the overall theme of the match, regardless of any comebacks and search and destroy, is that Florida did win 2-3-5, winning two searches. For a team with guys like Major Maniac and Havoc who are known for their S&D play, if Florida is going to be winning some matches this year, it feels like that's going to be their recipe for success.
Yeah, I'm not really confident in either one of these teams. Like you said, they're like, I think quite obviously two of the bottom four teams, at least at the moment on paper and early in the season. But I have really low expectations for Vegas always, and I was pleasantly surprised with their performances this weekend. It gave me a little bit of hope that it won't be as bad as last year, and for Clayster's sake, especially, I don't want it to be, and for Temp and the guys, but Clayster's probably closer to the end of his career, and I don't want him to be on the worst team ever. And like if we take a pound of salt and we say they probably won't be the worst team ever if they're able to do this and compete with LAT, nearly pull off a victory against Florida. But you got to close out those victories. I know Paris lost a lot of close games last year, and that was a big reason why they were so bad. Their record was so bad. Hopefully it's not the same for them this season, but I guess we'll see. Next up is the final matches on Sunday. LAG versus London starting off. Of course, London, they won again, 3-2. You mentioned their search and destroy play. You want to elaborate more, or, give them their props because, they've, I mean, if you're going to take a lot from the first two matches of the online, they looked incredible in S&D.
Yeah, so I think let me just look back at because it was the 3-0 against New York. So ended up playing three search and destroys um, this weekend just because they 3-0'd and then they won 3-2 against LAG. The map scores were 6-2, 6-1, and 6-1. So that means they had an 18 and 4 round count in search and destroy this weekend. Regardless of what team that is, and at any level, that's pretty impressive. But especially at the pro level like this, that's definitely noteworthy in my opinion. And I think for another team like we were just talking about with Florida and Vegas, not a lot of people had high expectations for this London team.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're sitting at 2-0 after the first weekend of qualifiers, and they're playing well in Search and Destroy, which obviously, in my opinion, and in the eyes of many people, is the most important mode in professional Call of Duty. That certainly can make the case for Hardpoint, but I'm biased towards Search, so yeah, I just think that that's really important. If London, especially, is going to continue to be successful, where I think we likely have to see them continue to play well in Search, because I just don't know how strong of a respawn team London can be. But obviously, if they figure out their hard point and they're playing this well in Search, like that's the recipe for winning championships. So again, early on, small sample size, but really impressed with London's start in Search and Destroy in particular. And in my eyes, especially when we see them playing going forward, is all eyes are going to be on their Search to see what they're doing and how they're able to be so successful in the mode if it continues.
I was especially impressed with London winning the searches against LAG because LAG looked really good in search in their first match. And, I was thinking maybe there's a chance that LAG will kind of get that swagger back that they had in Major 2 last year, where they were pretty much incapable of losing search, and that was the key to victory for them in almost every single match. That wasn't the case because London just completely broke them over and over again. which I don't know if that says more about London or if that's LAG or if it's just online and we shouldn't take anything from it. But definitely kudos to London. They did this last year. They were solidly like the third best team for like at least the first quarter of the year in the 2022 season. And things fell apart near the end, but maybe they're able to kind of get back there because each individual player definitely has their role and is definitely talented in their own right. It's just that the star power on that team doesn't impress me to the point of other teams. But maybe that doesn't matter. We've seen in the past before where these teams, they don't have like this superstar, but they're able to play together and win matches regardless of that. Next match was OpTic versus Florida. A really big bounce back win for OpTic because we talked about it earlier, having a really, really disappointing and frustrating way to quote unquote lose your first match. But they came out, they decently close hard point against Florida, where Scump again had a very solid game, but really it was Shotzi and Dashy combining for 50 kills. And then in Search, Scump double figures, and then it was not really close on Control, which is a good thing because they didn't probably want to replay it again if it got close again. What do you think about OpTic? And we talked about their loss, but what did you think of their win?
Yeah, I think, again, going back to our opinion on Florida, not going to harp on Florida because, I like a lot of those guys on that team, but it was important for OpTic to win this one 3-0, I think, just in response to the last match. If you're expecting to be a top dog and a really strong team to take care of business and convincingly handle / not struggle against a team that's not considered to be in the upper echelons of the rankings, that bodes well for OpTic, and I think that they can put the controversy behind them. That's nothing they can do about that now. It's done and over with. They just got to look ahead at these matches, try to finish 3-1 to give themselves the best possible position for Major 1.
Yeah, no debate here. Nothing really surprising in that series, to be honest. The second to last match of the weekend, Atlanta versus LAT, a rematch of the last CDL Championship final where LAT won. LAT seemed to have Atlanta's number late in the season, but the FaZe were able to come out and beat the Thieves in the opening match of this season. A 3-2 win for Atlanta, and a good bounce back win, just like we talked about with OpTic, but Atlanta coming off that loss against Boston on day one, able to beat LAT here. What are your everlasting thoughts on what could be the rivalry of the season if these two teams are able to kind of do what they did last year?
Yeah, I was looking forward to this match, and it definitely didn't disappoint. If anybody listening to the pod wasn't able to catch this one, I definitely recommend going back to watch it because it was a pretty good series. Regardless of the result, most of the maps were close, and just a lot of action. So it was definitely what you were expecting from the two top dogs at the end of last season. Probably in many people's eyes, you think LA Thieves are going to continue their end of year streak against Atlanta, but Slasher gets some quote unquote revenge against his former organization, and they're able to take this one 3-2. I think most notably, the thing that stood out the most to me was the end of the Control, which obviously could have been a huge turning point in the series. It was in the round 5, I believe. Yeah, so Thieves were on offense. They capture one of the zones and get 2 ticks on the final zone, and they had a life advantage, which I can't, in this clip, I can't look. The latest it shows me is 10 lives remaining for Thieves to 6 for FaZe. I think it might have been even a little bit bigger of a difference than that at one point in the round, but regardless, it was FaZe being on defense, only being able to allow, or not being able to allow Thieves to capture any more segments because there's one left. and having to lock it down because of Thieves capturing the time, basically having to hold like just one tick for over a minute. So it was a pretty impressive. I don't want to say comeback because it was 2-2, but however you want to describe it, it was an impressive display from Atlanta to be able to clutch up and close out that control and what could have easily been a 3-2 win for the Thieves. And if you look at that, if they're able to take map 3, they win the following hardpoint 250 to 165, which was arguably the least close match of the entire series. Then you're potentially looking at a 3-1 win for LAT here. So that control was huge. Obviously was a must win for Atlanta, but overall, yeah, this is a super entertaining series, and I hope we see these teams continue to clash throughout this year, as I'm sure we could be set to see.
Yeah, a really good series, and like you said with the game 3, that control was pretty crazy. They were at least a 7 kill different or a 7 live difference at one point. The Thieves had like a 20-13 advantage, and then it did get down to like 10-6 or something like that. And then Atlanta basically didn't die anymore. I think Simp might have died once in the final minute, but they were able to hold on and defend the final control point. I mean, that's kind of what you expect out of Atlanta, right? Like that they're able to clutch up, and even against a really good team like the Thieves, they're able to kind of pull it out in the end. Those are what the great teams seem to do time and time again. And the Thieves, it's a loss, but it's just one loss. It's not the end of the world. And we saw last year, it's really not about how you start, it's about how you finish. The Thieves didn't really have a good first half of the season, but their second half was a lot better, and that's really all that matters at the end. And then the final match of the weekend was Toronto versus New York. I think this was an interesting match coming in because obviously when we were predicting it, we hadn't had the pleasure to see Toronto or New York, but coming into this match, even through the weekend, both teams had lost their first match of the weekend, and definitely you don't want to go down 0-2, especially when you have a 4-match qualifying period instead of a 5-match qualifying period. Any thoughts on Toronto's 3-1 victory here?
Yeah, I think to start the series with a hardpoint win for New York was important, especially coming off of that 3-0 loss to London, which in our eyes and potentially many other people's eyes was surprising that it was not only a loss but a 3-0 sweep. It was important to get a map win on the board for New York in my eyes, but after that, Toronto took over the series. There was the 1v4 from Hydra in the Search and Destroy, which was just absolutely ridiculous. Well, other than that, the last 3 maps were essentially all Toronto. There was also the one spot where Insight basically climbed up on a TV on the wall in the B bomb site of Hotel, and I certainly didn't know about it. I don't know how many pros knew about it, but yeah, I think it's safe to say that Insight taught a lot of people that spot. And New York, it didn't seem like they were aware because he was able to pick up a 2-piece in that round to close things out. So that was a funny one. And if you're playing ranked play, whenever ranked play comes out, or CDL mosh pit, whatever it might be, you're certainly gonna want to keep your eyes on that area of the B bomb site if you're running in there for when you're playing Hotel.
Yeah, definitely. I I just can't believe that some of these guys, they play the game so much that even other players that are dedicating their entire lives to this don't even discover it. It's pretty amazing when you think about it, because it's not something that happens in like football or basketball usually. Nobody's really inventing stuff, but in Call of Duty, guys are basically inventing stuff all the time, and that'll probably be called like Insight Spot or something, Insight Box, something like that. So congratulations to him for likely getting a call out at least for the next year or two. So the pick'ems as they stand right now through week 1 of the new CDL season, I am leading. I have a 5-7 record, so not great, but you have 4-8 records, and that's makes it great. And but like I said earlier in the show, we'll likely be getting better at these as the season progresses. We hope that we get better at them. We did have like a 55 percent win percentage, or at least you did, I think, last season, which was pretty good. I thought, considering we predicted like over 100 or something matches throughout a year. But hopefully we'll be a little bit better by the time that the season wraps up. So it's time for predictions for week 2. Again, this is the final week of qualifying matches for Major 1, which will be a Pro-Am, like we've discussed. So let's get right into them. On Friday, December 9th, which is tomorrow, or today probably if you're listening to this, we have Seattle versus London. So 0-2 team versus 2-0 team. Who do you got in this?
I gotta go with Seattle. I'm not jumping off the not picking London train.
I'm gonna pick London because I gotta jinx it, I think. Florida versus Minnesota. I think it's pretty obvious I have to go with Minnesota. I just think they're a really good team.
I agree.
New York versus LAG. I'm gonna go with New York. I'm not super convinced about LAG, and New York's bad weekend last weekend doesn't necessarily convince me that they're going to be that bad all the way through.
Yeah, I could see it going either way. I'm going to go with LAG though.
And then the final match of Friday, Toronto versus Atlanta. I'm going to go with Atlanta, but I'm really looking forward to this match.
Yep, I'm going with Atlanta too. I think if Toronto's able to jump out early, obviously it's different because it's online, but if Scrappy gets a little excited and starts talking some trash, they could get some momentum behind them. But I think Atlanta should take care of business here too. I will say too, just real quick, one thing that we didn't mention was I don't know the exact details of it, but for Toronto's first match, they played in I think it was in Toronto's headquarters, and they had like a little crowd, and they had the 4 players set up like facing the fans as if it was like on a LAN environment. Obviously, for Toronto's first match, they didn't end up taking that win, but I still thought that was a really cool thing to see, and I think it's actually really smart, especially for a team like Toronto with a rookie like Scrappy, who he certainly played in LAN events, but not at the CDL level yet. I think it's cool to see, and we talked about in previous shows how some of these orgs are planning on doing some like LAN setups for online qualifiers later in the season. I think that's just a really smart thing, and it was cool to see, in my opinion. I hope we see it from more teams, and it could be a potential evolution of these online matches. We might get to the point where all the teams are doing something like this, and I think it could only be beneficial to them.
Yeah, definitely. It could turn into a community event, especially if these online matches are every weekend or most weekends. Just having fans come in and sit down and get to watch the players play, and even if it's a group of 10, that group of 10 makes a difference, I think, and it could get these players ready for LAN and just the pressure that goes along with playing in front of a crowd, even if it is much bigger when we actually get to LAN. Next match of the weekend is we'll go to Saturday, December 10th, Atlanta versus Vegas. I think we both are probably going to go with FaZe on this one.
Yep.
OpTic versus London. I'm going to go with OpTic. I can't pick London in 2 matches. I think that's a little too much. What do you say?
I'm going with OpTic too, but I think this, just based on London's performance early, this is going to be a good test for them.
Yeah. New York versus Boston, a classic rivalry. Not really in the CDL, but I'm going to go with, who are you going with?
As much as it pains me, I'm going to go with Boston here.
Yeah, I'm not feeling overly confident either way. I think I'll go with the Breach as well. They did play really well.
And just to clarify, it's not, a painful pick for me in CDL terms, but as the pinstripe behind me prove, thinking in traditional sports sense, it is weird to pick Boston over New York in anything.
Yeah. LAT versus Florida, the last match of Saturday. I'm going to go with the Thieves.
Yep. That's
Uh,
a pretty tough schedule for
yeah.
Florida. They got to play Minnesota and Thieves this week.
Yeah, but if they're able to pull off one of those wins, it could, especially the first one, could be a real momentum changer, but that's easier said than done.
Yep.
Sunday, December 11th, we have the final four qualifying matches of the weekend. Minnesota versus Vegas. I have to go with Minnesota.
Same.
Seattle versus Toronto. I'm probably going to go with Toronto.
I am too.
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of a tough schedule for Seattle as well because obviously they're 0-2. They face London in the first match of this weekend, and London has looked really good. And then playing Toronto is no easy feat, like in any season. I think there's a real possibility that they'll be 0-4 going into this major. And then the final two matches feature LA teams. The first one, LAT versus OpTic, the HBR Classic, as I like to call it. A pretty big match, I would assume, because both these teams heading into the weekend with one loss. It could have some seeding ramifications. And more importantly, probably just the momentum aspect of this. If you go into the major off of a loss, even if it's online, I don't think that's ideal. I'm gonna go with OpTic, but I'm not convinced either way. Both these teams are always capable of winning any match.
Yep, this is definitely one I circled right away when I was filling out this doc for us. I'm similar to FaZe versus LAT last week. Really looking forward to this one. I think this could be the best matchup of the whole weekend. I'm going to go with the Thieves.
And the final match of the weekend, the Los Angeles Guerrillas versus the Boston Breach. I'm gonna go with the Breach. I'm not, I've said it before. I'm not convinced LAG are, one of those top tier teams. I'm not really convinced that Boston is either, but I just feel the Breach on this one. What do you think?
I'm going with Boston too, which means that I have Boston going 2-0, and they very easily could go 0-2 because of that.
Yeah, I mean, we could a lot of these teams could lose that we're picking. We could both have a losing record again going into the major. Which the major we should mention is going to be starting on December 15th. We'll have a show before then, obviously, but the event begins on Thursday, December 15th in Raleigh, North Carolina. And like we've mentioned on the show, this will be a pro-am as well, which means that the top challengers teams will be competing alongside the CDL teams, which is the only time I believe that this season that will be happening, which it's always a cool event. We had the first Pro-Am Classic mid-season last year, and that was fun, but it felt weird because it was kind of in the mid-season break and teams probably were kind of getting used to each other, whereas this is a lot bigger. This is the first major of the season. Everybody wants to start off on a good note, start off on the right foot. And I think it should be a fun event when we get to the first major. Before we get out of here, I'm going to let you take over on the GA and the new meta stuff. I did see it on Twitter, but for the people that aren't glued to their Twitter timelines and aren't up to date with all of the latest happenings with the gentlemen's agreements and COD, can you fill us in on the M4 stuff?
Yeah, so I think anybody who watched this weekend, it should have been very apparent that the M4 was just the most dominant gun seen by the team. In many cases, you were seeing 3 used by each team on any particular map.
Mm-hmm.
So the conversation and the drama this past week was about whether they want to continue using the M4 or not. It seems like there was like a leaked screen grab of the chat saying use it until Major 1, and now it's seeming like they're not going to use it for the rest of these qualifiers, but that's just going to be something to keep an eye on. In place of the M4, it seems like most players are going to the SCAR, which I think is the TAQ56. I might have got the numbers wrong, but it's something like that. Basically, the SCAR from old MW2 for longtime COD fans. It essentially looks the same and functions the same. It's a little bit of a slower gun. It feels stronger in some situations to me, just because it has that a little bit of a slower rate of fire than the M4, but if you're consistently hitting your shots, you might even kill just a little bit faster. Which is weird to think about, but if you actually feel the gun and see it in action, you might see some situations where that might not sound totally dumb. But regardless, I like the SCAR a lot in this game. I think it could change the pacing though, and that's one thing. Like the M4 just feels more like a do-it-all sort of gun at this point. You can almost with certain attachments, which might be GA'd, not entirely sure, but regardless, you can set your M4 up to almost run like a sub and AR at the same time, and um, with if the M4 is removed, we might be able to see a more traditional split of actually players using the SCAR to be AR players and the VASNEV to be sub players. So I think that could be what we see a little bit more of if the M4 isn't used this week, but we're going to just have to wait to actually see how things shake up due to this. But that's something definitely to keep your eyes on this week, which could be uh, could totally change how some of these results go, because obviously this past week we saw how teams played with the M4, and if they switch it up, it could completely change the results for some teams. So definitely going to play a factor this week if the GA is actually initiated and followed through on, and I do like the SCAR though as a gun in this game, so I will be interested to see how the pros are able to utilize it if it is the new meta AR.
Yeah, definitely could have a pretty significant ramifications just with the meta, not only for these online matches, but because the LAN is a week away, less than a week by the time everyone here listens to it. I mean, players have to travel to North Carolina, and that means practice won't be, all the way till, Thursday morning. And that's even less time to practice with the SCAR or whatever gun is going to be replacing the M4 in the meta. So, for the final week of online matches and for LAN, that's a pretty big change to be happening, mid stage or whatever. But should be interesting, and definitely tune in. I believe the viewership for the first week of the COD League, which we didn't mention, it was on Twitch for the first time in the CDL's history, because the CDL had been on YouTube for the first 3 seasons. I think it was the day of or the day before. I think it was the day before the CDL began this year. They announced that they were moving back to Twitch, and they would also allow co-streams on Twitch, and then they would also be streaming on the Call of Duty League.com website. That's awesome. Over 100,000 viewers on Twitch. I believe even more when you looked at the co-streams and whatnot. So an awesome weekend to start off the CDL. Hopefully that continues on this weekend. Do you have anything before I do my shtick? Okay, so subscribe and follow, and make sure to keep up with our podcast feeds. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. We're also on YouTube, where you can watch the video version. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating or a thumbs up wherever you are listening or watching on. Follow us on Twitter. He's at JBink with 2 Ks. I'm at Preston Byers, and the podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. The next show will be sometime earlier next week. Because the LAN starts on Thursday. We got to get it out at the very latest on Wednesday. So we're aiming for Monday or Tuesday to record this and get it up the next morning. And on that show, we'll be covering these final online matches, how they went, and then previewing the very first major of the new Call of Duty League season. So that should be fun. That's all I have. Take it away, Bink.
Yep. Thank you guys as always for tuning in. I don't have the numbers for the audio version of the podcast. That's all Preston, but I was happy to see for our first episode for this new season that we did have some pretty good views on the YouTube video. So I just want to thank you guys for tuning in last week, and hope you guys continue to do so and you like what you hear. So thank you guys for that. I'm looking forward to another good weekend of matches leading up to that major next week. And yeah, we're back in full swing. So thank you guys as always, and remember to send the chow.